Good day, everyone. Welcome to CX Excellence Chats with Anjali, the podcast that's all about transforming your business through the power of customer experience. I'm your host, a growth and customer strategy consultant with a passion for discovering brand and human relationships. In each episode of this podcast, we dive into a critical component of strategy that can potentially make a huge difference in your business evolution, but always powered with a customer lens. Our theme today is very interesting. It is about the interplay between psychology and technology, both of which are essential for unraveling the secrets of consumer behavior. Well, if that sounds complex, let me explain. So, firstly, we know that businesses desire growth in revenue and profitability, and the only way to achieve these is through acquiring and retaining customers for the long haul. And we know that customers pay it forward to brands they love through their loyalty, their wallets, and that's the end goal for the brand and the customer both. But in order to reach that level, that pinnacle of loyalty, brands invest heavily in technology to impart superior experiences to customers across their life cycle. And these technology applications influence the way people interact and also behave, but vice versa. People influence choice of technology as well. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, let's talk about psychology. Now, psychology, the way it's understood, is basically the scientific study of mind and human behavior. And even though it's most commonly thought of as a discipline which identifies and treats psychological disorders, and for treating mental health fields and so on, clinical services, but there are numerous branches of psychology that collectively interface with almost every sector of society. In fact, everything and anything that humans indulge in. And that includes customer management and even advanced technology. So today we are going to discuss this very sweet spot where customer experience sits, which is a cross between human psychology and tech-led interactions. And how does that impact how brands and customers engage with each other? So as we go into this, we'll probably try and get a grip on consumer behavior, triggers, barriers, motivators, preferences, and choices that they make that can potentially empower brands to make more intelligent decisions. Now, in order to discuss this, who we have today is a gentleman who's really inquisitive and passionate about human psychology. Despite being a techie, his interest lies in exploring human behavioral psychology and its interplay with technology. So, without further ado, let me introduce him. Welcome, Varadharajan
Hi.
Ragunathan.
Yeah.
Hi, Varda.
Hi, Anjali. Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Varda, for making time for this. Let me give a short introduction to you, and then I will invite you to add to that. So, Varda is an IIT Madras and IIM Ahmedabad graduate. By profession, he's currently the head of customer engagement at BigBasket. He holds 24 plus years across brands like P&G, KPMG, Times of India, Amazon, and now with the Tata Group. He's also spent a few years as capital advisor in Citi and keenly interested in public markets and investing. Quite a diverse set of skills and interests, I must say. Varda, would you like to add to that?
No, nothing. I think we all live sort of, multifaceted lives. I'd like to believe that most of us who have fulfilling lives are not necessarily defined by our title or the job or the main avocation. We all have our own, small residue of childhood that is still left with us. So if you can find something that meaningfully weaves that passion with something that you can add value to others on, I'd like to imagine you can be a lot more happy and fulfilled.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. It's the human versus the roles you play, right?
Yeah,
And a lot of the time, the world tends to sort of perceive us from the roles we've played, the designations we've held, the chairs we've been on. But I think the attempt in a discussion like this is to uncover the person behind that.
yeah, that's
I
right.
think that's going to be the attempt. And I know the couple of conversations that we've had, I've been very intrigued and interested. So tell me, I mean, a little bit about yourself. How did you become so multi-talented, and when did you really discover that you had this whole innate ability for looking deep into human psychology and behavior?
Well, it's been sort of a passion for the last 10 years. I think, like Steve Jobs said, I learned handwriting analysis for a couple of years. I still don't know to what end. It's not like I work with the police or anything. I just get that, sort of, well, the same simple joy as I guess a tarot reader gets when he or she finds something that hopefully you can agree and resonate with. Then I did a fair amount of read up on forensics and psychological profiling. Of course, this was just sort of derived based on my passions, which again was an outcome of my childhood reading, right? Things like Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie, etc., etc. So I think one thing led to another, and I just figured that, ironically, being an engineer, the one thing that actually makes you stand out the most from all other engineers is some sense of liberal arts, right? And I couldn't find anything else except for psychology because it just seemed so fascinating to find out why do people do the things that they do, right? And it's such a sort of large cliche. Why do you look at people the way you do? Why does your body language, act the way it does? Why do you speak the way you do, etc., etc., right? And these are endless sort of ambiguous questions, right? There is no end in sight. It's an endless philosophical discussion that you can have in your mind. And the great thing is you're always discovering answers that are getting better and better and better. You probably are at point one when you begin with. You hopefully can get to point three or point four, and when you're getting better, right? And the other great fascinating part about psychology that this is a very stochastic probabilistic science. So it's not just take a framework and force fit. There is no one single answer, unlike engineering or in maths, that what's 2 plus 2, right? How do you assess an individual? You look for eye movement, you look for body language, you look for handwriting, the staccato and the speeds, the choice of adjectives, etc., etc., right? And these by itself are such fascinating individual sciences. And I always think of this analogy that this is like a string of pearls, that each of the pearls per se may not be that valuable. You put that together and more importantly, run a thread through it. And if you can figure out a design to that, right, some thoughtful way to do it, then the whole becomes much, much more valuable than the individual pieces. So I think that's really that each day, I just find something that is very fascinating. To what end, I don't even know. Like, for example, I've done some work to improve metro ridership all across India, right? And I had submitted it to Niti Aayog also, and thankfully, some of those ideas are even getting implemented. And I find great joy, uh, you know, to essentially define what is a large ambiguous problem. Again, it has no end in sight, right? Everyone potentially could be a consumer, rather user of a metro, right? What stops a certain sect from not traveling on the metro? What are the mind blocks, etc., etc., right? Like, for example, just on the topic of it, one of the things that came out was that a lot of women came and said, hey, we just don't feel comfortable getting into a metro station for the first time because these look like industrial gray warehouses, right? Elsewhere, for example, in Europe or some of these more evolved places, they try and have graffiti. They make the metro station walls look a little more cheerful, so it has the feeling of a collegial atmosphere. Right? As simple a thing as that, right? Why should your metro walls just be gray concrete or white cement? Can you just make that better? I'm not saying overdose on billboards or advertisements. Why can't they just talk to you? Right? And that just makes it a little warmer, right? And there are just so many of these things that just collectively make it a far better experience.
Actually, this is such a powerful science that even a small insight could actually have potentially fairly large consequences,
Yeah.
right? And that impacts all brands, all categories, all businesses, right? But somehow, do you really think that businesses use the power of psychology to really understand their customers and use that to their advantage and to the customer's advantage, because eventually I think the attempt is to forge strong bonds. I still feel that it's very, very undervalued and underplayed.
Yeah, correct. It is. It is like I said, there is just no end in sight.
Hmm.
And thanks to use of technology, you discover new access that you
Hmm.
can talk on, every day, right? Earlier, till let's say these AI models came into being, I could talk to you as an individual, fully knowing your full list of past behavior, choices, etc., etc. Now that's possible given the computing power that you have. But it will just be so dragged to sort of narrow it down to like a list of bits and
Hmm.
bytes, right? If I can figure out a way to get that input, and most importantly, talk to you in a texture that you feel comfortable with, right? For example, somebody at Target or so, I think they say they had this great insight that lots of people will come and say, hey, this guy, this is summer temperature is 47 degrees. It's very hot. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so we should sell him a buttermilk. Or what? It's just a simple example. Okay? So if your shopping cart just popped up buttermilk,
Hmm.
right? You'd probably not. You'd just be, you
Hmm.
just feel flummoxed, right? But if it said, I think, refresh yourself. It's a hot afternoon with, mint tinged buttermilk to wash down your lunch, right? I am obviously not Piyush Pandey, but you get the drift, right? When somebody talks to you with empathy and care, then the leverage that they get is just sort of astounding. Right? So
Yeah.
it's the same thing. The end outcome is I want to let's say make you drink, a cup of buttermilk.
Hmm.
But it's the difference between the way I suspect your grandmother would handle versus let's say somebody at a hotel would handle you, right? So
Sure, sure. It boils down to a lot about communication and possibly therefore, marketing, engagement, personalization, and so
it
on.
is.
And you are actually in the thick of it as head of customer engagement in the last few years. That's what you've been doing. And I'm sure therefore you've experienced the power of just reading through what would be contextually more relevant and therefore getting a higher probability of response, and just deploying. But tell our viewers, be very interested to know, how do you unravel what may be going on in someone's mind? And of course there are just so many plethora of people out there, so what's the probability that what you're saying is going to catch the attention of more number of people, or that you've been able to personalize it?
It is just an iterative experiment, right? That's the beauty of this. That you do this, see if it's at least an improvement, right?
Mm.
If I said if I call buttermilk chas in Delhi, it would
Mm.
probably do better. As simple as that, right? And I don't know how to validate this. Right? It's just common sense. More number of people can relate to a masala chas than spiced buttermilk. Uh,
Got
What can
it.
I? What can you even sort of argue on something like that, right? A lot of this is just sort of a series of multiplicative commonsensical
Sure.
decisions. Like I said, per se, each of them will not move the moon needle, but
Mm.
like a string of pearls, if you get three, four things right, you will start to see some crawl up, right? And that's the best way to sort of, you know, look at it. I think uh, no matter what you do, how successful it is, you will always discover another new axis.
Mm.
Uh, if you apply your mind to it, and that by itself becomes the joy for you, right? Because you are learning something that is completely new. It's like someone enjoying a sport. As you get better, you realize you can do something even better. You probably played forehand better. Now you have to play backhand better and smash better and dives better, etc., etc. Right? So it can be a lifetime of
Yeah.
joy.
Yeah, it's a muscle to build, right?
Yeah,
And
it
then
is.
period of time through accumulated experiences, and you create trends, and they're then convert into some form of a science saying we know what works and what doesn't, and then apply that. So I think that's what a whole lot of marketers probably end up doing. Okay, very fundamental question, Vardha. Consumers, basically, just referring to human beings right now, I'm not really talking in the context of consumer, but we make decisions which are both left brain and right.
Mm,
Those that are led by more data, facts, and
yeah.
logic, those that are led by humor, feelings, emotions, and so on. In your experience, through your work life, when it comes to brand choices and how they choose to interact, who they choose to interact, which part of this, which sphere of the brain do you think is playing out more?
Uh, you'd be surprised. I think given the cognitive load that we have, right?
Mm,
And given the always on connections that we have, earlier, 20 years back, it was unthinkable for you to ask all the members in your family if you should
mm,
watch a new release on Netflix. Now
mm,
it's just so easy. Every family has like a WhatsApp group, right? You
mm,
just have to, you don't even have to type in the question. Just enter half the name of the movie and put a question mark. Somebody will give you with chime in with something.
mm,
Ironically enough, I think it's now become easier than ever to go with quote unquote stereotypes. And those
mm,
stereotypes don't even have to be defined by you. They are a stereotype of a person that you believe in or you who's close to you, right? So half the time you're making decisions because you trust somebody else's judgment. Or you don't want to offend that person. Or that person you want to belong to that tribe, right?
mm,
Which is both well, I mean, for lack of a better word, a worrying sign as well as an opportunity. A worrying sign because that's why you see increase in
mm,
sort of things like drugs, alcohol, etc., etc. It's just so easy to sort of get
mm,
influence. It's also a positive because it's just so much easier for you to get information, right? The asymmetry is completely sort of gone. But onus is now on you to distill all of these and figure
mm.
out what suits you, right? So it's not. It's sort of like what Google has done for you, right? Getting information about a shop isn't an issue.
Easy.
Is that what you should be doing given where you are at and what you are at is really the key question. So it's a bit of a profound statement, on your own context, saying, given what I am doing at 11 o'clock, should I be having this conversation? Is a more
Mhm,
philosophical question that doesn't have an answer. How do I have this conversation, right? How do I connect to the net? How do I get into this screen, etc., etc.? These are things that are much less ambiguous. So
mhm,
I think the premium for people who can solve ambiguous questions has gone up a lot,
mm,
which is what AI is even continuing to accelerate. If you can define a goal, getting there is much easier. So it's the same analogy of a self-driving car. Where to get
mm.
is a bigger question than how to get there,
Sure.
right? So the whys and the wheres have become more important than the hows.
Got it. Yeah, because how is being answered a lot by tech, and
Yeah, that's right.
but it's the whys and the how, wheres which kind of define direction.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And getting the directional sense is so critical. I think uh, Jeff Bezos, who's one of the leaders I admire, said one of the great traits of a great leader is fine judgment, the ability to get right the big things time
Mm,
after time. You will never get them right 100% of the time, but even if you can get them right 60, 70% of the time, you're doing far better, right?
mm,
And which is the reason why you see people who have probably worked their entire life off for 40 years, diligent, extremely good employees, who finally go and get scammed on real estate or on crypto or something like that, right?
mm,
Because in that 5 seconds or 10 minutes of their life, they're not applying their judgment. They're just going with a stereotype. And this is now becoming an increasing trend. All of us are now becoming a lot more susceptible uh, because there is now so much information overload. Your ability to distill, let's say, fake news from real news, disinformation from real information is becoming worse.
mm, mm. And it's very individual, right? Because each one consumes the same stimulus differently. Yeah.
Yeah,
And what you referred right now was actually how I make preferences, say, between making deep discovery on my own versus recognition. You talked about the family group and somebody saying, go for it or don't go for it. This is my opinion and so on. Of course, the decision still lies with me. But I think the point I was trying to get to was, as human beings, do we tend to do deep discovery, look for data, find information? You said information is at our fingertips, right? A Google
yeah,
search gives you everything you need.
correct.
But is that is that something that motivates people more, or do recommendations and somebody's thumbs up matter more in versus
These
facts?
days,
Hmm.
for the generation that was probably yours and mine, where people had to make the effort to go to a library, ferret out the information, and then get the satisfaction that
Hmm.
what they discovered was indeed their own
Hmm.
effort. I would have probably said it mattered more if you did a Google search, but now I think all of us have evolved to a stage where we have so many of these shortcuts and metal mops.
Hmm.
Social proof, asking someone that you know, going with the judgment of somebody else that you trust, etc., etc. So I think we are now, especially amongst the younger generation, we are seeing a lot more of social proofing, where people go with the choices of others
Hmm.
simply because those are the choices of others
Yeah.
without
I think
necessarily asking if this is indeed sort of true.
correct. So
Which is
from
why both the virtuous as well as the vicious cycles are a
uh,
lot more exaggerated, right?
so from a brand standpoint, the premium on information has come down.
That is, yeah,
Premium on validation, say peer referrals and so on,
just gone up.
probably gone up.
Correct.
That's what we're sort of deriving
And
at.
the biggest premium is on distillation, right? I mean, I'm saying those who can distill a lot
Yeah.
and form a finer judgment about what will work, they
Hmm.
probably are the scarcest resources these days.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. And actually, that brings me back to the first question which I asked you, which is really that are they being led by emotions and feelings? I mean, I have a theory on this, but I'd like to know from you that when we make decisions about purchasing, say, two brands, commodities, or even if they're not commodities, but the products are similar, similar features, similar advantages, and so on, why would I choose one over the other? Is that really a logical decision, or is that an emotional decision?
It is like with most things, it's both. I think depends on the type of product. I think if it is, for example, a utilitarian product, for example, a lot more of these FMCG goods are
Hmm.
now bought more and more based on. Earlier, it was bought based on Halo. You bought a serve because maybe a Shah Rukh Khan was endorsing it. Now, what's happening is a lot of people go to, let's say, an Amazon or a big basket or what have you, read the reviews and say, hey, someone else thinks this is a good product, so I'll go with the choice, right? So, the traditional wisdom of marketing that I had to engrave my brand
Hmm.
into metaphorically your brain as a stone has gone away, right? Uh, I don't need my brand to be engraved in your brain metaphorically. You just have to be there with a validation when that person searches for that category.
Hmm.
So I don't have to have be a part of your hard disk. As
Hmm.
long as I'm a part of your cache and RAM, when you're popping up that file, metaphorically speaking,
Sure.
then you're doing very well, right? And that's really the traditional sort of that's really the playbook for a lot of D2C brands. That I don't necessarily have to build something long term, right?
Hmm.
But I will make the product extremely sharp unmemorable, right?
Hmm.
So I think someone said this that distinctiveness has become more important than differentiation. That for a long time it was believed that the product had to be genuinely good, but now because there's so much more clutter, if you are, let's say, a purple brand in a sea of reds, as simple a thing as that will make you stand out, right? Of course, you then have to do your math to check if, let's say, 100,000 people are buying red and 10% of them are going to be shifted over to your purple brand. Based on the quality of the product, how many are going to come back, right? Obviously, the emphasis on quality then has moved to repetition, loyalty, and retention rather than the first purchase itself. So that's broadly the math. Earlier, I'm just saying, till when the internet was nascent, people would research every product for 5-10 minutes, right? Now they just read a review on Amazon, right? I don't have to be the one doing all of that research. There are 200,000 people who have already done this, and this product is rated 4.5 stars on Amazon. So that's a good enough surrogate for me to go with. But however, I think what is now happening is while that has liberated a lot of bandwidth on your low utility, low quality items, now people are putting a lot more extra emphasis on the high quality, high experiences like Airbnb,
Yeah.
travel equivalent, which is a theme that you would have said that you would have heard all all across the world post COVID. People are down trading
Yeah.
items on which they were earlier spending mental bandwidth, like soap, shampoo,
Hmm.
surf, dishwasher, and saying, I'll just go with the flow. Right? If something is rated 4.5 stars, I'm not even going to think about it. I'll put in that extra time on my next vacation or
Hmm.
on my next flight, something that gives me a lot more
Experience.
experiential joy, right? So I think that's the big shift that we are seeing, and this
Yeah.
is only going to get better and better and better, or faster and faster and faster with the AI assistants and stuff like that, right? I think just like a lot of us now have standing instructions for a broadband bill, I think the time is not far off when you're going to say, look, just replenish my grocery basket,
Hmm.
just wipe my floor clean with a robo, etc., etc. So you can then focus on the things that are truly bespoke,
Hmm.
that you just cannot get as a cookie cutter, which is, let's say, which is, let's say, a travel experience that you have, a
Hmm.
movie experience that you want to give for your family, etc., etc. And that's a big sort of shift.
I agree. So, whilst you're laying a lot of emphasis on validation, and referrals and recommendations, there's also this view that I'm unique, and just because a bunch of other people like something doesn't mean it's relevant and right for me as well. And so, therefore, and especially when it comes to more experiential stuff, not commodities. Yeah. So there, I think the human psychology would be that what are people like me doing, and how are brands kind of using that? Because when you have reviews, they're just a bunch of, you don't know who's really the person reviewing this. It's just 2,000 reviews, this rating, this is what it is. But is that really people like me, or is that somebody else? Because there is
Correct.
differentiation in choice and behaviors and preferences, right? So.
Yeah, in an ideal world, you would want to sort of narrow down that tribe to
Mm,
people who are relevant to you, right? I think there was this famous example of Indian folks sort of not being happy with strollers made in Germany simply because Indians are much shorter than
yeah.
Germans, right? And they're less stoutly built. So the leverage that you need to push
Mhm.
a stroller in India when you're both shorter and less sort of well endowed
Mm.
is much higher, right? I'm just saying. So if you looked at, let's say, 2,000 reviews and said this is a great stroller for lugging your kid around, you'd probably be mistaken, right? But I think the good news is soon enough, I think AI will allow you to distill that. But again, the key question will be, how do I know I have to distill this along people who are a little shorter?
Mm. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not that it's not that it's not distilling it along the axis of being a little shorter that is a challenge. The machine can do it for you.
Mm.
But how do I know that if I am buying a stroller, the height and the build of the person who's pushing it is more important than the functionality in the stroller, because that's what gives you comfort. It's a
Yeah,
very sort of, that's a judgment that you probably will not have unless you bought a couple of strollers and you finally figured out this
yeah,
this sort of art, right? It's
yeah,
not there in any textbook. It's not something that you can get through a Google. That essentially that you buy strollers that are fit for your height and build,
yeah,
and that is probably a bigger uh, you know bigger, more material access than the space in the stroller or the features or whether it has got extra bags, etc., etc., is something that I guess you'll have to pay a premium for, as an expert, right?
that's
So there are,
Varda, because this is not even from a consumer standpoint part of my checklist. There's a checkbox which says, size, space, bags, I don't know,
yeah,
pockets, whatever else not. But the other stuff comes more intuitively, and that is where this whole innate understanding of what's going on in his brain, which he or her may not even be aware of themselves at a very superficial level. Yet it is critical to that decision. So
mm.
are really brands and marketers and businesses getting there to see, really look that deeply and understand where decision making really where the ball turns.
uh, with some practice, they'll get better. I think, look at it this way, right? Earlier, you would have probably had to spend a lot more lot more time to distill this, read thousands of reviews, find out what adjectives, what keywords are getting repeated, overlay them and then sort of do a fill in the blanks and say if somebody was using things like too tough to push, too difficult to pull up a ramp, etc., etc. That's what this means, right? Now, I think the mission can do that for you. Like with most things, I think it can liberate all the time that you needed to do the grunt work, but then the onus. So I think this is sort of a loose mental model that seems to have manifested itself in most fields, that the space between the winners and the also rans is
Hmm.
widened even more, simply because now the winners have a huge leverage of
Hmm.
a much better finer judgment that
Hmm.
you are getting, right?
Yeah.
Earlier the field was much more crowded. I think now, just like what is happening with big tech, the winners have become, winner takes all, because
Hmm.
not only when they become better, right, they have the benefit of more people coming in
Yeah.
and more data flowing in, which makes the flywheel spin even faster. Right? It wasn't like that in FMCG. That it became like a winner takes all sort of platform, like a Facebook or a Google. Right? You see the point that I'm making, that now things have become so much more crowded that whenever something is declared a success, everyone rushes into it,
Hmm.
and the fact that everyone rushes into it by itself makes it a even more successful sort of
Sure, sure.
business.
First one to crack that is the one that is what you're calling winner takes all, and which
That's
leads
correct.
us to this whole thought that comes to my mind is about ethnography, right? And I know brands that are now choosing that over simple qualitative research, which is more deeply immersive, to really understand core behaviors and drivers of behaviors. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, like I said, and that's another axis.
Hmm.
I think you'll have to again sort of, I'm glad you sort of brought this up. Things like ethnography, right, tend to
Hmm.
play a lot more on, categories like foods,
Hmm.
clothing, right? Not far less in something like a mobile phones or electronics.
Sure.
So again, it is very important for you to see what are parts of your culture that get manifested. And I think there's this sort of mental model that food sort of changes the slowest. It takes 35 years, which is why all of us, in spite of eating, let's say, Western brands, still eat dal and palak and chawal, and we are perfectly fine with that, right? Whereas something like a mobile phone changes the quickest. Something is working in Korea, you probably want it the next day in India, right? So automobiles will probably be somewhere in the middle. Clothing will again be closer to food than closer to a mobile phone, right? You still wear, let's say, Western clothing 300 days a year, but cut over to your important functions, you're still comfortable with Indian clothing, right? In fact, I would actually now argue that there's a lot more emphasis on being more proud about your own clothing,
Hmm.
on your own sort of indicators of cultural success, right? So each of these have different sort of weightages. So
Hmm.
again, if you're a mobile marketer, you can safely ignore ethnography. If you're a clothing marketer, you probably cannot ignore ethnography. Not only that, you should also know that ethnography in India is probably layered 7 or 8 times below India itself, because there is north, south, east, etc., etc. But dressing
Totally.
is different, the way you organize a function is different, and so on and so
Hmm.
forth, right? And
Hmm.
whereas if it is food, even within something like a Delhi, you'll probably have four different varieties, right?
Hmm.
Maybe there is like a Punjabi cuisine, there's a Mughlai cuisine, there's like
Sure.
Indian Chinese, and so on and so forth.
Sure. No, I totally agree with you. Yeah, it's very category specific, and things that we hold dear to ourselves, which are part of our identity, I think tend to be steered more by such very core drivers at a deep subliminal level, and I think identifying those may really help brands sort of move the meter.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about psychology. Let's move a little bit into technology and the interplay. You referred to AI, so let me sort of start with one question on AI. AI and LLM algorithms use past data, yeah, to infer and predict what might happen, or at least give you information about it. whilst cognitive psychology somehow is far deeper. It's about people's motivators to solve problems and make decisions. Can we design AI systems, or is it even possible to design AI systems that can mimic some of these human processes, which are so unpredictable and not always led by the past?
I guess in maybe the next iteration, possibly yes. Right. So essentially, everything can be at some point productized, right?
Mm,
If essentially what is this fine judgment at this point of time, just like a human being does, when you look at somebody's clothing, I suspect you and me can just look at them and say which part of India are they from, right? Based on at some point of time, everything can be productized, right? Science
mm,
can make things, can essentially also overlay the judgment that we have, that we just talked about, let's say the ethnographic or cultural sort of context. For that to happen, essentially, the AI model needs to be trained on the fact that when you look at somebody wearing a dhoti and a white shirt,
mm,
this is what it means, right? I think at this point of time, we still don't have enough qualitative data on that.
mm,
There is probably a lot of data on what is the fastest selling shirt online, right? Which is a very hard, easy to quantify
mm,
stuff. I think how some of these mental models are mapped in your mind, which are stereotypes, which
mm,
cannot be defined very quantitatively, right?
mm,
That when somebody wears, let's say, a boot and suit, is more likely to be, in a Western sort of attire, right? Is is something that AI models as yet have not been strongly trained on. Will it happen? The answer is absolutely yes. Right? It will probably happen in the next iteration. Right after that, I guess what will start to matter is maybe your anthropological context and your mental context.
mm,
Right? Not only do I have to talk to you as an individual, I also have to talk to you as an individual in the context of today being Monday morning. Are you at work? Are you at play? Do you have other responsibilities outside of work? What must be playing on in your mind? And hence, how do I craft my message? So, like I said, with every access that gets unraveled, newer access tend to emerge.
yeah.
And usually it's the person who's able to get the lead on the newer access who's the winner, at least for that temporary period.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because you unlock some value through that,
That's right.
which you can use to your advantage till it becomes parity, and then the race just
Yeah,
continues.
correct.
Right. Interesting. I'm sure we'll get there at some point, even though this is deep, dark secrets in human mind, which are tough to, bring to the fore. But let's sort of rest that and look at something else. So, cognitive psychology also plays a crucial role in design of technology solutions. Today brands deploy design thinking principles in creating products like websites and apps, to just design interfaces which are more intuitive, user friendly, effective, and so on and so forth. So, how much do you think? How effective is this process of being able to see into human psychology and creates, products that tend to serve them better or make it more convenient or easy to
It's
transact?
become easier. It's become much easier. I think as simple a thing as creating a Figma prototype or
Yeah.
essentially translating an insight into a UX has just become almost commoditized. That
Mm,
you can get tools that probably can work as well as a freehand drawing, right? That's the ultimate sort of degree of freedom. Obviously, with all the benefits that come from making it look professional, right? So, I think we've definitely gotten much better, right? But what I think we've still not sort of figured out is we are still looking at screens as two by two, right? Can they themselves become transformative? Can they change colors, stripes, textures? Can you have different things that float in and float out, etc., right? We are looking at a screen as a two by two. What if, let's say, a pop-up just, you know, flew out and flew in or vanished, right? If somebody was calling you, instead of you making it into an obtrusive sort of call, could it just be like a gentle nudge on the bottom right that surfaced up, right? And say, do you want to take this call, right? It'll be so much easier for people who tend to get interrupted quite a lot of calls and also do a lot of Zoom calls, right? So, uh, like I said, that's the frontier, right? I'm sure somebody can run with this idea and make this much easier. Saying why should, let's say, a call on your iPhone be different from a Zoom call? Can it just be one single integrated screen? So if you're on a Zoom call, automatically it just sends a message on your, on your WhatsApp saying I'm on a call. Can I call you back unless it's urgent or something like that? Right? So there's just a very simple way to craft it. Maybe you can even make it better by saying as soon as the call ends,
Hmm.
what if it just popped up and said, hey, you have to finish up this call because this person called you amidst the call, right? And made it easier and even dialed it proactively for you, right? So, like I said, everything can be made faster, better, smoother, etc., etc.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. So, a couple of things, takeaways. A, of course, design thinkers have come a long way in terms of understanding, consumer profiles, personas, and creating stuff for them. But I think the point you're trying to make is that lot more work on UI contextualizing, making it more relevant, and so on is possible, especially when you deploy more creative arts designs, things like colors, designs, pop, as you said, not two by two, and but you are you've been heading customer engagement, right? And any marketer will tell you simpler, crisper, well laid out communication will be more effective in securing response, and also trying to get ways and means of understanding who he is and where he is and personalizing, which obviously comes from data. But can you share some light on how you have used it and any takeaways in terms of good
So,
practices?
maybe I think one of the big myths that people keep talking about is everything has to be hyper personalized. And
Mm,
customers want to maximize the depth of what they see
mm,
all the time, right? But this Q-commerce, for example, has disproved that with Q-commerce, I'm not going to show you 200 varieties of detergents. I'm probably going to show you three or four, but
mm,
with the assurance that you will get it in 15 minutes, right? I think we tend to look at customers as people who want to maximize on multiple access. That's not true. I think people want to stay within a Goldilocks zone that is acceptable. That I am okay to look at three detergents if you can get it to me in 15 minutes. If you can get it to me in 22 hours, I probably want to see 8 or 10. A mobile phone which comes to me after a day, I want to look at 2,500 varieties simply because A, it's a mobile phone which is a much more sporadic but high value, very highly engaged purchase. And two, when it comes to a mobile phone, I want to be sure that I'm making the absolute optimal choice because the downside of not me not making that is tremendous. I buy a poor detergent, that's fine. I'll probably live with it for a month and be done with it. But a mobile phone is a much more involved sort of purchase. In fact, it's probably the biggest productivity driver for most of us, right? You have a
mm.
poor mobile phone, your entire day gets sort of ruined, right?
Yeah.
So you want to make sure you optimize for the best phone. And in most cases,
Mm,
customers may be even willing to wait an extra day if they're getting the phone that they want because they're going to use it for 2 years. And the productivity improvement that a good phone of your choice gives you over those 2 years, over a suboptimal phone that can come to you in 15 minutes, is much higher, right? I think this is a sort of a mental model that now people have started to come around with, that you don't have to always play on pushing the frontier on choices like it
mm,
happened with microprocessors. For a long time Intel kept adding more and more capacity, but it changed once you add laptops because now you're fine if you have marginally lower capacity as long as it has much better battery life, because you're not looking to do intensive graphic stuff all the time. If you're sitting in a Starbucks and with most of your time is spent on, let's say, phone calls and Zoom calls, you would rather have a 15-hour battery life
yeah.
with an optimal processing than have 3x the processing and have half the battery life, right? So I think these are things that
Mm,
sort of change every 5 6 years. It's important for you to sort of keep track of them, right? And in the context of groceries, for example, people are now more and more receptive towards cross sell, which is like I am buying surf. I know I need comfort alongside because comfort goes to fragrance my clothes. I also need maybe a soap brush or a cloth brush once in 6 months, right? So customers are now not even expecting that they will. at some point of time, every 6 months, customers would just be okay with you, let's say, suggesting a toilet brush, right? A brush to clean the toilet.
Sure.
That goes with your Harpic, saying, I just don't have the mental bandwidth to sit and sort of optimize for this. Maybe
Sure.
my brush hasn't worn out, but I might as well sort of get this in proactively because the downside to me not having a brush is much higher. Sort of like why you service the car at
Yeah.
every 1 year interval, even if you haven't done a lot of running on it, simply because you just don't want the downside of it getting stranded in Delhi traffic.
Yeah. So brands are basically doing that thinking on behalf of the customer and just making their
That's
life,
right.
saying, hey,
Yeah,
you don't need to lose your mental bandwidth over these trivial stuff and let me just sort that out for you. And that's
that's
where I
right.
come closer to the brand because I feel, wow, they really understand me and they give me proactively what I thought I would have needed. How did they even know? And I think that's where you're coming from. And that's how it translates into experience. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just one more question on, this whole
We
customer.
are on time, so yeah, I have
Yeah.
a hot stop at 12.
Just one more question on customer service. We today everybody's got these bots, right, on their websites or apps or wherever, and a lot of people are moving away from human conversations to bot conversations. What do you think people prefer, the tech or the human?
I think at the stage at which these bot conversations exist, probably not bots right now, but I think with a couple of more iterations, they'd
Yeah.
probably be easier, right? Because bots right now can only handle a very direct pointed question, which in most cases typically is a part of your regular workflow. If you were to ask an airline, has the refund for my flight that was rescheduled on, let's say, July 3rd, come through, it would probably not be able to understand that question because it involves first understanding what flight does this person book, did that get rescheduled, and if yes, what happened to the refund, right? There are 3 or 4 parts to it.
Yeah.
But if it just asks, is the flight on time, it would probably be able to answer it. See, the thing is, I don't need to ask a bot to check if the flight is on time. I can just do this through a Google itself, right? So I think we're at the stage where the AI trained bots, which have also been, trained by humans in the loop
Yeah.
for some of these corner cases, are getting better at it, right?
Absolutely.
Soon enough, I think they will get there. But as of now, I think the experience with bots is still very, very cumbersome.
Yeah, yeah. Because a lot of them are not NLP trained, and
Yeah,
therefore the language comprehension capability still leaves a lot for the asking. But more that gets sharper, and more we are able to build in. You actually nailed it when you said human in the loop, where you optimize the benefit of both of these, streams, and then give an optimum
yeah,
solution and a great service. So I think
yeah.
that will kind of bring us to the end of our conversation. But before we leave, I'd ask you to share some parting thoughts with the listeners in terms of, how we can use our understanding. I mean, you've talked a lot about it, but any thoughts on, how we can look at our customers
Well,
differently?
I guess I think it's probably the most cliched, right? I think if you live the customer long enough, you start to get insights that you never thought of.
Mm,
And live it from the angle of why should the customer choose you? Then, I have a great product, I will get my customers, right? I think it's such a humbling sort of thought that customers are multiple choices. There's no onus for them to choose your product, right? They're not even aware of the product. They probably won't even come back and so on and so forth. So if you just look at it from the view of an unbiased customer,
mm,
not somebody who's a loyalist, that's the other thing that most brands make. Other mistake that makes, they'll go talk to a customer who's already a loyalist, right, and then say, wow, he's saying there's nothing wrong with the brand, but reality is 99% of customers out there are never going to be loyalists, right? They probably don't even know your brand. So I think it should be quite the opposite. The harsher the truth that you hear at the time of reconnaissance, the sweeter the results will be, right? So usually you talk to a guy who's rejected your brand after having bought it once. It's probably the worst that you can have for the brand. He'll come up with like a list of 10 things that you can improve on, right? And that's probably the right way to do it.
absolutely. It's like Bill Gates said that your unhappy customer is your best friend.
That's
And
right.
that's
Yeah.
gold. That's the information you're really looking for.
Yeah.
On that note, thank you so much, Vardha. I
Thank
think
you.
it's been an extremely intriguing conversation delving into
Thanks,
the human
Anjali.
and analyzing how we think, behave, and make decisions. And whilst consumers feel and rationalize, I feel my view is that people feel they're making fact-based decisions, but I think a lot of it is motivated by emotions and feelings, which they may or may not acknowledge. But usually it's some gut feel which tells you go for this,
Yeah.
and not always able to describe it, but it's there. And I
Yeah.
think the more we are able to unravel that and understand it, the more value we can unlock as brands and brand managers,
Sure.
uh, to sort of communicate with them and engage with them and convert them into, as you say, loyalists, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think thank you so much for your time once again.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to the
Much
audience,
appreciated.
yeah, thank you to the audience. Thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of CX Excellence with your host Anjali. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and found some stimulus today, which can help you reflect on the role of psychology and its interface with technology as you design your CX. So remember, the success of your business depends on how hard your CX works positively for you. So until the next fortnight, keep mastering this art.
Thank
And
you.
thank you so much for today. Bye bye.